Alright, before we looked at how to factor when a is 1, when we're looking at a trinomial in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c, we looked at how to do this when a is 1. Now we're going to look at this when a is not 1. So a could be 2 or 3 or 5 or 1,000 or something like that. You still follow the same steps. You still factor out the GCF. You would still look for special factoring, but there's not going to be any special factoring here because the only special factoring that we've learned works on binomials. And then we are going to factor normally, and factoring normally is going to be a little bit different when a is not equal to 1. Alright, so we have the steps from yesterday. We have the steps from yesterday. Write in standard form, of course. Factor out the GCF other than 1. So if the first term is negative, factor out a negative. Multiply a times c. Alright, multiply a times c. Find the factors of a times c whose sum is b. Okay, so just like we did before, a times c, whose sum is b. They're going to multiply to give you a times c. They're going to add to give you b, and that's what's going to go in these two. However, after this, we are then going to factor by grouping. And factoring by grouping is a little bit different. We're going to look at how that works in just a second. Alright, so it's not going to give us the answer straight away or the factor straight away from doing this, because we are going to have to factor by grouping after we're done there. Alright, so let's take a look at number 1. We're going to start setting it up as we did before. Alright, a times c in the top and b in the bottom. We're looking for numbers that multiply to a times c and add to b. A times c is negative 6, b is negative 1. And the numbers that we're looking for here, negative 3 and positive 2. Negative 3 times 2 is negative 6, negative 3 plus 2 is negative 1. Alright, now, what this is going to do is we're going to rewrite the problem 2x squared minus x minus 3, except we're going to rewrite the minus x as the two terms that we found here, negative 3x and positive 2x, because those add up to negative x. The 2x squared is going to stay, and the minus 3 is going to stay. Now, this is where let me put this over here so I can have a little bit of room. So, what we're working with is 2x squared minus 3x plus 2x minus 3. So what we have is 4 terms. So what we're going to do is we're going to group the first 2 terms together. And we're going to group the second 2 terms together. And what we're going to do is in each of these groups, we're going to factor out the GCF. We're going to factor out the GCF from each of these groups. So factor out the GCF of the first group and factor out the GCF of the second group. Even if it's 1, we're still going to factor it out. So this is a little bit different. Even if it's 1, we're still going to factor out the GCF. So the first group, the GCF is x, and the second group, the GCF is 1. So for the first group, I'm going to factor out an x. I'm going to be left with 2x minus 3. For the second group, I'm factoring out a 1. And I'm going to be left with 2x minus 3. You'll notice that both of these are multiplied by 2x minus 3. X is multiplied by 2x minus 3. 1 is multiplied by 2x minus 3. What that means is that 2x minus 3 is a factor for both of these terms. So I can factor out 2x minus 3. And what I'm going to be left with, x for the first term and 1 for the second term. So the factored form would be 2x minus 3 for the first factor and x plus 1 for the second factor. So 2x squared minus x minus 3 factors into 2x minus 3, and x plus 1. Keep in mind the GCF at the very beginning was 1, and that's why we didn't factor out the GCF at the very beginning. However, when you get to this part, this is called factoring by grouping. This part requires you to factor out the 1 so that we can have it here. Alright, 2x minus 3, x plus 1. Alright, if we look at number 2, this actually has a GCF that we have to factor out before we begin. The GCF here is 2. So we need to factor out that 2 before we start. So we're going to have 3x squared minus 5x plus 2. Alright, now I'm going to use that cross I was using, where multiply to give me a times c. They're going to add to give me b. A times c, we're looking at this trinomial here, 3 times 2, so it's positive 6. B is negative 5. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me positive 6 and add to give me negative 5. So it looks like I'm looking at wait a minute, what am I looking at here? Negative 3 and negative 2. Negative 3 times negative 2 is 6, negative 3 plus negative 2 is negative 5. So remember, I'm not using this to completely factor this, I'm using it to actually split up this minus 5x. And I'm splitting it up into minus 3x and minus 2x. So I'm going to have 3x squared minus 3x minus 2x plus 2. Alright, I do want to keep this 2 around, but I'm going to use it in the final portion here, so don't forget about it. I'm going to leave it out for now. I guess I'll put it over here just so we don't forget about it. But I don't want to get it confused with what I'm doing here. Here, actually, I'll come back and bring it down at the very end. Alright, so I'll bring that 2 down at the very end. Alright, now I'm going to factor by grouping. That means I'm going to group this first part together. Whoops, let me just undo that. I write this a little bit bigger and a little bit more spaced out. So I have 3x squared minus 3x. I'm going to write this as, no. And then I'm going to have minus 2x plus 2. Alright, so I'm going to group these two. And I'm going to group these two here. However, I want a plus sign in between them. So I'm going to do this as plus, and then the group will be negative 2x plus 2. And the reason for this is because I want that negative sign to be part of the second group. Alright, and it's on the minus 2x, so I'm going to leave it on the minus 2x, but I do want a plus sign between these, because if that minus sign's on the 2x, it needs to be on the 2x when it's grouped together. Alright, so I'm going to factor out the GCF from each of these groups, from the first group and the second group. So the GCF for the first group is 3x. The GCF of the second group is negative 2. That's a negative because the first term is negative. Alright, so that's why I needed it to be inside the group, because I need to factor it. I need to factor that negative sign. Alright, so when I factor out the GCF of the first group, 3x, I'm left with x minus 1. And then I factor out the negative 2 in the second group, and I'm left with x minus 1. And this is what I'm hoping for. Both of these are, this first term is multiplied by x minus 1, has a factor of x minus 1. The second one has a factor of x minus 1. So I can factor out the x minus 1, what I'm left with the first term is 3x, and what I'm left with the second term is minus 2. So, my factored form, don't forget about the 2 from the very beginning. 2 is also a factor. So the factored form would be 2x minus 1, 3x minus 2. And where's that 2 coming from? It was one of the factors. It was the GCF when I started. So that was the GCF when I started, and then when I factored by grouping, I got x minus 1 and 3x minus 2. So the whole factor, 2x minus 1, 3x minus 2. All right, number 3, the GCF of number 3 is, of course, 1. So we don't really need to do that. We can do the cross, a times c on top, and then b on bottom. A times c is, so that's 5 times negative 2, that's negative 10 on top, negative 9 on bottom. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 10 and add to negative 9. That's going to be negative 10 and positive 1. So what this is going to allow me to do is split up the negative 9x into negative 10x and positive 1x. So I have 5x squared minus 10x plus 1x, or just x, and then minus 2. And I'm going to factor this by grouping. So I'm going to group the first, I'm going to group the second, and then I'm going to factor the GCF out of each of these. So the GCF of the first group is 5x, and the GCF of the second group is 1. Since I'm doing grouping, I do need to factor out that 1. So if I factor out the GCF from the first group, 5x, I'm left with x minus 2. And if I factor out the 1 from the second group, I'm left with x minus 2. And this is what I wanted, because now both of these terms, first term and the second term, they both have a factor of x minus 2. So I can factor out x minus 2, and what I'm left with will be 5x plus 1. And this is my factored form of 5x squared minus 9x minus 2. X minus 2, 5x plus 1. Oh boy, got a lot of examples here. All right, I'm going to go through these examples fairly quickly. So number 4, we have, I'm just going to write over this stuff. So number 4, if we try to do number 4, we see that the GCF is in fact 1, so we don't need to factor that out. We do the cross here, a times c in the top, so we got negative 30 up top, so 15 times negative 2. On the bottom, we got plus 7. So the two numbers we're looking for that multiply to the top number, add to the bottom number, we are looking for, what are we looking for? Negative 6 and 5, nope, that's not going to work. Negative, yeah, so positive 10 and negative 3. They multiply to give me negative 30, they add to give me 7. Alright, so I'm going to split up 7x into 10x and negative 3x. It'd be 15x squared plus 10x, and then minus 3x, and then minus 2. And I'm going to factor this by grouping. So here's the first group, and here's the second group. So I am going to put a plus sign in between these so that I know it's being added. I'm going to factor the GCF. The GCF of the first group is is 5x. The GCF of the second group is negative 1 because it starts with a negative, so GCF is negative 1. So if I factor 5x out of the first group, I'm left with 3x plus 2. And if I factor negative 1 out of the second group, I'm left with 3x plus 2. Which means the first term has a factor of 3x plus 2. The second term does as well. So I can factor 3x plus 2 out of each term, and what I'm left with, 5x for the first term and minus 1 for the second term. So the factored form of the original problem, 3x plus 2 times 5x minus 1. Those are the two factors. Number 5, GCF is 1, so we don't need to factor that out. So we will set up the cross. So up top, we got 15 times negative 6, so that's negative 90. And the bottom, negative 1. So the two numbers that multiply to the top number and add to the bottom number, negative 10 and positive 9. Multiply to negative 90, they add to negative 1. That's going to allow me to split up. So we got minus 10x plus 9x and then minus 6. I'm going to group this. This is my first group. This is my second group. So the GCF of the first group is 5x. GCF of the second group is 3. So if I factor the 5x out of the first group, I'm left with 3x minus 2. And if I factor the 3 out of the second group, I'm left with 3x minus 2. And these two terms, this term and this term, have a factor of 3x minus 2. So I can factor out the 3x minus 2, and what I'm left with, 5x for the first term and 3 for the second term. So the factored form of 15x squared minus x minus 6, 3x minus 2, 5x plus 3. Number 6. So number 6, the GCF of number 6 is 1, so we don't need to factor anything out. We will jump to the cross, of course, since there's no special case. So up top, we have, what did my computer just did? 1 second, guys. Because my battery is not charging. Give me 1 second. All right. So what number were we on? All right, so up top, a times c, so that's negative 12, negative 6 times 2. The bottom, positive 1. The middle term, b. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply to this and add to this. We're looking for positive 4 and negative 3. It's going to allow us to split up this middle term. So we're going to have negative 6x squared plus 4x minus 3x plus 2. So all we did was split up the x into positive 4x and minus 3x because those make x. Alright, so I'm going to group the first group, group the second group. I do want a plus sign in between these because they're not being multiplied, they're being added. Let's get that thing to go away. Alright, the GCF of the first group is going to be negative because the first term is negative. So the GCF of the first group is negative 2. GCF of the second group is also going to be negative, and actually we need to go back. Messed up here because I factored out a 1 and I should have factored out a negative 1. So let's just fix that real quick. I factored out a positive 1. Since the first term is negative, I definitely should have factored out a negative 1. So let's try this again. Negative 1 and then 6x squared minus x minus 2. Alright, now I will set up the cross with this 6x minus x minus 2. So this is negative 12, still negative 12. This is negative 1. So the numbers I'm looking for are negative 4 and positive 3. See, I was going to run into issues because I didn't have this broken. I didn't have the negative 1 factored out here. Okay, so keep that negative 1 in mind. It is a factor. I am going to come back to it. But for now, I'm going to leave it off. So this is going to be 6x squared minus 4x plus 3x and then minus 2. Okay, so all I'm doing is splitting the negative x into negative 4x and positive 3x. I'm going to group the first two terms together. I'm going to group the second two terms together. I'm going to factor the GCF out of each of them. So the GCF of the first group is 2x, and the GCF of the second group is just 1. So when 2x comes out of the first group, I'm left with 3x minus 2, and 1 comes out of the second group, and I'm left with 3x minus 2. So 3x minus 2 is a factor for both of these terms. So that's going to give me so I'm going to factor out the 3x minus 2, and I'm going to be left with 2x for the first term and 1 for the second term. Now, I'm not done yet because I still need to take into account the negative 1 that I started with. So negative 1 was factored out, and then we got factors 3x minus 2 and 2x plus 1. Okay, so this is my factored form of the original problem. Negative 1, 3x minus 2, and 2x plus 1. Each one of these is a factor because they're multiplied together. So negative 1 is a factor of this, 3x minus 2 is a factor of this, and 2x plus 1 is a factor of this. Alright, number 7, the GCF is x. So we need to factor that out first. So I'm going to be left with 4x squared minus 3x minus, 10. I don't know where I got 5 from. So minus 10. Alright, now I can use the cross on my new trinomial that's in the parentheses. So I am going to have negative 40 up top and negative 3 in the bottom. And the numbers I'm looking for, I want to say 8 and 5. Negative 8, positive 5. They multiply to negative 40, they add to negative 3. So keep this x in mind. I'm not going to be writing it from this point on, but I do need it at the very end. So I'm going to have, so I'm 4x squared, and then I'm splitting up negative 3x into minus 8x and positive 5x, and then minus 10. So my first group will be 4x squared minus 8x. My second group will be 5x plus minus 10. I'm going to factor the GCF out of the first group, and the GCF of the first group is 4x. GCF of the second group is 5, so I'm going to factor that out. So if I factor 4x out of the first group, I'm left with x minus 2. And I factor 5 out of the second group, I'm left with x minus 2. Running out of room here, so I'm going to be going up here. So x minus 2 is a factor of both the first and second term. So I'm going to have x minus 2, and then what I'm going to be left with for the first term is 4x, and for the second term, 5. All right, I'm not quite done yet because I do need the x that I started with. So x is the first factor, x minus 2 is the second factor, 4x plus 5 is the third factor. All right, so the three factors of number 7, x, x minus 2, and 4x plus 5. Those are the three factors. That's the factored form. So the worksheet on this, when a is not equal to 1, we're looking at numbers 1 through 15.